God is not provable, which is another way of saying that, yes, God is hiding. He's hidden himself so that we may find him. That's the game of hide and seek that God is playing with us. The scriptures say that when God first created the universe, all the people immediately sat down, started meditating, and merged back into him. And God scratched his head and said, well, that didn't work out very well. Let me try again. And he tried again and again. People just sat in meditation, merged immediately back into him. And then he called one of the sages over and he said, I'm not doing this very well. Do you have any ideas where the best place to hide would be? And the sage said, well, Lord, it's going to have to be pretty hidden. And the Lord said, well, how about at the bottom of the ocean? And the sage said, no, people will get there. How about the highest mountain? Oh, no, people will climb there. How about out in outer space? No, Lord, people will come eventually to conquer all of space. And the Lord said, well, where do you suggest? And the sage said, well, search where hide where you think they will never ever think to look. Inside themselves. And that's what God did. I mean, it's all an apocryphal story, but still, that seed of truth, that seed of God, is at the heart of every atom of creation. And yes, God is hidden. We don't see him unless we turn the inner eye to the heart and look within ourselves. And that's why this reading from the Bible said, the wind blows where it will. You hear the sound of it, but you do not know where it comes from or where it is going. So is everyone who is born of the Spirit. And so Jesus is saying, when you tune into those who are born of the Spirit, who have been reborn, who are in tune with God, then you can start to get a glimpse of what God is. You start to be able to tune into him through his saints, through the masters. I've been reading recently stories of Padre Pio's life, and those of us who went on the last Italian pilgrimage visited his place in southern Italy and could feel the vibrations of his presence. These great saints, no matter what religion they belong to, what outward affiliation or no affiliation, if they have tuned into that spirit, if they've tuned into that spirit of truth, that cosmic oneness, then they have something to share with us. They can give us something. And Padre Pio, being a somewhat modern saint, he passed away in the early 1960s, is more contemporary with us. It has a lot more to share with us. And so I'll tell you a couple of little stories that give a glimpse into how we too can tune into that cosmic consciousness, how we too can become saints, because truly that is our destiny, and everything that happens to us is tailor-made for us to grow spiritually. to overcome whatever it is that we need to overcome in order to become perfect. Perfect channels for God's love, His bliss, His joy. Because that is our only job in this world, to be instruments for that divine energy. So, one little story of Padre Pio is that he, as many Catholic saints have done, worked out in his own body much of the suffering as penance to help other people. Even Swami Kriyananda, when he was starting the work in India, went through tremendous suffering. And it was understood that his suffering was tapasya, to help build Master's work in India. And so Padre Pio worked out in his body much suffering to expiate the karma of other people. And one evening, as was generally what happened every evening, people were gathered down below, a couple stories down from his window, and they were chanting and they were singing songs, and every once in a while they would crawl out, "Padre, give us your blessings." And at the end of the evening they would say, "Good night, Padre," and ask again for his blessings. And if he was able, he would go to the window and he would say, I love this. "Yes, my children, a river of blessings. May the Lord bless you and make you holy." And one time, one of the other friars was in the room with him. And as Padre Pio came back from the window, this friar said to him, "The Lord bless you and make you holy without any difficulties," adding to the prayer. And so let's not have any difficulties. And Padre Pio, very sternly, he was quite a character. You think these saints are sweet, humble, little joyful beings. He was intense and fierce, and he said, "What? Of course there has to be difficulties." Because that's how we grow. That's what we're here for. We're not here for a little vacation life. I often think, that could be kind of nice, actually, Born in Hawaii, doing the hula, ripe fruits. I like this. The ocean, swimming, could be good. But we're not here for that. We're here to find God. We're here to grow. And God, as a loving Father, gives us exactly what we need to grow, to get stronger, to fight. That's how we get stronger. The inner fight, not outwardly, the inner fight, to overcome, to conquer, to be strong, to be loving, no matter what the circumstances. It's not easy. Well, there was another time Padre Pio was in his bed. He was in a lot of suffering. And sometimes some of the friars in the evening would come and kneel at his bedside. He had the stigmata, so he wore a little mitten to cover that stigmata. And they would kiss his hand. He would give them a blessing. So one evening, again, some friars were in his room with him. And another friar came in and knelt, asked for his blessing, and Padre Pio gave him the blessing as he did with anyone. And afterwards, one of his friends, one of the other friars, when this man left, said, "Padre, you must be a saint to have given that man your blessing," because this friar had slandered Padre Pio. He had said awful things about him. He had spread lies about him. And But what Padre Pio said to that was, the sun does not go down without Padre Pio forgiving everyone. Forgive everyone. It was a turn of phrase on that saying, don't let the sun set on your anger. Don't ever go to sleep with anger or hatred or resentment in your heart. Forgive everyone, every day. So that's a beautiful reminder of what we have to do. The scriptures say if we harbor any anger, we have a lot of way to go on the spiritual path. We're not there yet. That's a big sign that we're not there yet, if we have anger and resentment. So let that go. Learn to release it and live in peace and goodwill towards everyone all the time. There's another beautiful story of Padre Pio I don't think he was in bed, but he was building his hospital. God only knows how he managed to collect all this money for the hospital. They had nothing, but money came in from around the world and manifested this hospital against all odds, with many interesting battles and drama. But they created this beautiful hospital. Well, there was a young architect who was working on it, and the story says that he was 6'5", or very tall anyway, and Padre Pio was not that tall. So Padre Pio was sitting in a chair, and this young man knelt in front of him so they could be in eye contact, and Padre Pio wouldn't have to strain to look up at him. And the young man said, "Father, what is it that you see when you look at the Eucharist?" Because, as you probably know, when Padre Pio did the Mass, sometimes he would be staring at the Eucharist for a long, long time. His Mass would last hours sometimes, because he would just go into a rapture and be staring at this body of Christ. And Padre Pio said, "I see what you don't see." And that is what we need to learn to see. We see this world. We see our bills. We go to the doctor. We, do all the things that we do, and we're so on a treadmill of all the mediocre, mundane, commonplace things. And then we watch TV just to relax and have a midnight snack, and then go to bed and repeat and repeat and repeat. And we wonder why we're not getting anywhere. If we fill our minds with the lives of the saints, if we fill our minds with the teachings of Yogananda, the teachings of the great masters, that is what will be in our minds. And when we need help, that's what will come into our minds, because that's what we have stored there. If we have soap operas and the racetrack and whatever, that's what we're going to get back out of our minds. Just as we are what we eat, we are what we think. Fill your mind with goodness and truth. Think about honor and beauty and righteousness. And that's what our minds will give us back when we are in need. There's another little story that I wanted to share. Padre Pio was hearing the confession of one of his other friars. And this friar later tells the story. So he's telling Padre Pio, you know, sometimes when I'm saying the Mass or these prayers, I get tongue-tied. And Padre Pio's nodding. Yeah. And then the friar goes on and tells him other things in his confession. And he says, and sometimes I talk about the other friars and I complain and gossip. And Padre Pio said, I bet you don't get tongue-tied then, do you? Why put gossip and negativity out into the world? Let it be at rest. Let every thought that you have, and Yogananda says this too, let every thought that you have be of goodness. I love the story of a man who got onto a crowded bus with his 2 little children, 3 and 4 years old. And he sat sort of vacantly looking into space in a little seat on the bus. And his 2 little children were wild. They were all over the place. They were loud, they were fighting, they were running, they were screaming. And everybody on the bus was getting righteously indignant. Why is this man allowing his children to behave like this? And finally, one person, feeling very civic-minded, finally said to the man, "Can you please control your children?" And the man sort of came out of a daze and he said, "Their mother just died and they don't know what to do, and neither do I." And everything shifted on that bus. No one was criticizing anymore. If we really understand why people are acting out, we have compassion. Let's learn to have compassion before we understand everything. Because it's really only with the heart that we can understand. So let's do the things that make us a saint. Let's practice them now, even though it's hard, even though we don't really like to. But what makes a saint is doing what needs to be done, doing it in the right way, even when we don't want to, even when it seems too hard. But that's what has always made saints, and that's what always will make saints.
Hearing those stories of Padre Pio reminds me that it's a great help, as Nirmala was pointing out, that he lived more recently, and so his example comes to us in a sort of more modern way. On that trip, we were able to meet some people who knew him, some people who were young and who were under his training directly, personally, and it's a beautiful tradition, or a beautiful, you could feel his energy through them. And it's really helpful to be able to see that, because you get something from, there's a wonderful movie. Movies about saints are really a mixed bag. I don't know if you've ever noticed that, but I have yet to find a good movie of St. Francis, which is kind of appalling. And there are some really awful ones out there, I can tell you from experience. There's some kind of mediocre or sort of average ones, but this movie of Padre Pio is quite lovely. Swami watched it several times. It's quite long. If you should watch it, take the trouble to watch it in Italian with English subtitles. And if you have to stop and read the subtitles, read them, but you have to get it in, you have to get the Italian, because it's done in Italian and it's beautiful. There's a version that has the English dubbed, and it's just horrifying. It's just just loses all its magnetism.
Dharmadas, tell him the story of what he said about Kriya Yoga.
So there was a friend of ours, not ours personally, but broader friend of Ananda, friend of Swamiji's, who was a Kriya Bond, practiced Kriya Yoga, and went to Padre Pio for confession. So this was in the 1960s. Padre Pio passed away in 1968. And he went to confession with Padre Pio. He was also a Catholic, but he practiced Kriya, and sat for confession and told Padre Pio whatever he wanted to tell him in terms of sins or whatever, but he also added, I practice Kriya Yoga, and I wanted you to know that because, it's a bit of a controversial subject. In certain quarters, yoga is a four-letter word, and in more ways than one, shall we say. And Padre Pio had a very interesting reaction. He said, shh, don't talk about these things, but you're doing the right thing. And you can get, that he could get, that this was drawing that person inward, drawing that person into spirit. And the saints, there's no competition, there's no branding among saints. That in the movie, there's a scene where there's this, the monastery is nearby, and out in front of the monastery there's a little bazaar that's been created, and people are selling things. And they've got this, it's just ridiculous, they've got this cardboard cutout where you can have your picture taken with Padre Pio, and you stick your face through this thing. And Padre Pio comes out and he just knocks it all down, and it's just like, what are you doing? Come on. It's crazy. People get all attached to the forms. They get all connected to the outwardness. And God is hiding, as Nirmala pointed out. God is hiding in all that. All of the drama that's going on outside, God is hiding in all of that. And we get lost in it and sort of stuck on the particulars of it. But taken inwardly, we can find deep, deep joy and realization. We were in Ohio this past week for part of the week. Nirmala's mother turned 90. Some of you very lovingly commented on the picture I posted on Facebook, and she's very saintly, a very saintly soul. She spends her day reading the Bible and praying for people and meditating in her way. And we had brought her a book that Swami had recommended to us many years ago. The book is called, I wanted to say Shaped by Saints. It's called Saints That Moved the World. Shaped by Saints is also a lovely book, by the way. We brought her a copy of that, which she had never seen before. And she's had various experiences that were challenging spiritually, and we wanted her to be able to sort of move with her peers, was the way I put it to her. I don't think she could quite accept that or relate to that yet. But it helps to have examples. It helps to see how do we tune into what is hidden? How do we, as Padre Pio said, I see what you don't see, how do we start to see what is hidden? How do we start to see what is beyond? Well, as Swami pointed out in the reading, there are exoteric truths and there are esoteric truths. And the esoteric ones are universal. We can look at the rain and think God is crying, or God has sympathy, or God is just watering the earth, or we can think a lot of things about something that's outwardly. We can have lots of interpretations. Inwardly, we go into the light. Inwardly, we go into divine peace or stillness. And these things are universal. They are in all cultures, in all connections. And so for us, it takes a bit of sleuthing. It takes a bit of hunting. And it also takes the realization or the acceptance that there's always more to the story. If you think, where is the beginning of a circle? Well, let's see. If we make 24 hours our circle, we can arbitrarily say, okay, midnight is the beginning, and then it comes around to midnight, and then that's the next beginning. Or the year starts on, why, January 1st, excuse me? What does that have to do with anything? It's completely arbitrary. We don't know where we came from. If you think of where did your life come from, we spring onto the scene here, and it's sort of like, I don't know if you ever as a kid walked up to a game that your friends were playing, and you didn't know the game. It was in midstream, and you just sort of have to figure out based on what people are doing, what are the rules, what is the object, what's trying to happen in this game. Well, we all face that a little bit in this world. We came into this world, we know not from whence. We leave this world, we don't exactly know where we're going. We have scriptures to say, okay, well, there's this after death. But we have to actually have the experience in ourselves before we can know. And Nirmala pointed out an important key to this. It's in the heart. We understand truly in the heart. With the mind, we can get all caught up in rationalizing this way and rationalizing that way. I was struck by an observation that someone made that when we get into an argument is to decide who is right. I'm right. It's my point of view. I'm the one who understands this thing. When we get into a discussion, we are trying to decide what is right, not who is right. And it's an interesting distinction between the two. And often we will get into an argument with the universe or with God, saying, why did you do this to me? Why is there suffering in the world? Why is this, that, or the other thing? And we have to get quiet enough, open our hearts enough, expand, like the affirmation said, expand our sense of self-awareness in a broader sense of reality to say, oh, I haven't fully understood yet, but I will. I may not fully know now, but this is an aspect of ever new joy. Master described divine realization as ever new joy, ever conscious, ever existing, ever new joy. That's one of the ways that God is described in the Indian scriptures. And it's that ever newness. God is the ultimate playwright or the ultimate novelist or the ultimate screenwriter. And I don't know how many movies you've ever seen or stories you've ever read where you go all the way along. There's a beautiful movie, if you've never seen it, called Random Harvest. Swamiji loved it. It's from the 1940s. Not a schoolmate directly, but someone who went to his school in England wrote the book, James Hilton. And the book is very interesting. The movie's a little different from the book. They're both beautiful. But in the book, you don't realize who this key person is until like the very last page of the book. And you finally realize that this soul, this woman, has been so loyal all the way through the book, all the way until the final page. You realize, oh my God, it was her. And this is what God does this with us time and time again. Till the end of the movie, you don't realize what it is. And then finally, in the last moment, it's like, whoa. And then you have to sort of, if it's a good movie, you kind of go back through and you think, does that really fit? Did it really go all the way back through all those different scenes? Well, that's what it's going to be with our lives as well. We find the truth, but it's a lot of twists and turns. God's going to keep us interested in the plot in this one. It's just the way these things go. So know that all of that ultimately comes to, we have to find the truth in ourselves. And that process is one of going within. Meditation helps, chanting helps. There's a lot of yoga, lots of practices outwardly that help us to go inward. But ultimately, it's a matter of tuning into that And then we learn to express that outwardly. Yesterday, Nirmala and I were at Ananda for a meeting, and the beginning of the meeting was a little bit remarkable, shall we say, because there was a stage that was about yay high so that everyone could see, and Jyotish and Davies had chairs on the stage, and so they came up. There was some chanting going on, and they indicated that another chant should start, and we were just waiting kind of for everyone to arrive. Well, so everyone had their eyes closed, and a few moments later, we hear this tremendous crash. It sounded like the entire dais collapsed in a heap of metal and bumping and crashing. We opened our eyes to see that Devi's chair had gone off the stage and her with it. And she landed, and what was interesting, and so she was, this great horror went up from the audience, and people jumped up, and she stayed down for a little while, calm, collected. She indicated to everybody that she was fine, but she took her time, sort of collecting herself and getting back up. She came up on the stage, and all she said afterwards was, "When I knew my chair was going off the stage, I relaxed." Now you think in your life, because we've all had experiences like this where, the car accident is about to happen and we can't stop it and time slows down and, whatever. Those kinds of experiences, we've all had them in one way or another. In my case, it happened once in 1985 when I came over the top of the roof and stepped onto the ice that was there that I didn't realize that was there, and I went shooting down the roof, and there was this moment where I knew I was going off that roof. There was nothing I could do to stop it. What do you do in that moment? You get a wonderful glimpse into the state of your realization, and if we can learn to relax the heart, relax the sense of this is not supposed to be happening, then something beautiful can come of it. And all of us, we can look for God's presence in all the situations in life that come to us, whether expected or unexpected, because He has this way of taking the expected and making it unexpected. So let us follow that journey inside, and we will know that joy and that bliss that is God's presence. We'll take an offering.